Hey everyone, I'm Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We talk about the Steelers season ending in another disappointing playoff loss where the blame lies from Mike Tomlin all the way down here on the Locked On Steelers podcast and where this team looks at moving forward. All here. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play. Just $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Steelers fans, another disappointing playoff loss to end the season. One and done for a fifth straight time when they've made the playoffs. The Steelers are. They lose 28-14 to the Baltimore Ravens in disappointing fashion. Not just because they lost, but how they lost. Being down 21-0 at halftime, offense giving you nothing early, and then the way the defense lost this game. Now, I could harp on the offense and Russell Wilson, and I will at some point, but I think you have to look at this game and you have to look right at the defense. And what's crazy was last week you said I had to say the exact opposite. The defense played a really good game against the top passing offense, held them to one touchdown. You should have won that game on offense. I'm not saying the Steelers should have won this game, but they should have been more in it, and it largely falls on the defense, especially when you come out with a Ravens offense that didn't even do anything intricate in their passing game. And that's not to minimize what the Ravens did. They played a great game. But what the Ravens beat the Steelers with was their ability to use the QB read option, which is something we talked about on the show, something I asked Cam Hayward about in the locker room. They needed to be able to just say, hey, let's contain this, not let them break big plays for it. You get 26 carries for 186 yards for Derrick Henry, 15 carries for 81 yards for Lamar Jackson. That's 267 yards on the ground from just the two of them alone, and 2 touchdowns to go with them. And then when you do that, it makes the passing game easy. You never force Lamar Jackson to be in that tough of a spot. Now, again, to credit Lamar Jackson, there were also plays where he dropped back to pass and third and longs, and he made some ridiculous plays in this game. And again, that's why I've said since about like week 16 or so, I think he is the MVP of the league, and he earned that title. But if you're the Steelers defense, you were supposed to shut that down in this game. And that's where Mike Tomlin, Terrell Austin, this team's game planning failed this team in this game. And you look at it, what's crazy is I feel like this is even worse than the other playoff losses, because at least against the Bills last year, you could say, well, that's Josh Allen in their crib, and you didn't have TJ Watt, and it was Mason Rudolph, and they had 2 turnovers. You're going to lose that game. And I agree with that point. The Chiefs in 2021, you could say, well, that's Patrick Mahomes. They were an all-time offense. Your defense held them scoreless for about a quarter and a half, even gave you a lead, but your offense was flat, and you had old man Ben. I can get that. Browns lost. That was just a whole mess of problems with starting the game off with giving up a touchdown. But this was different. You come out, and your team commits no turnovers. Russell Wilson doesn't put you behind the 8 ball with 0 turnovers. Granted, that doesn't help when you come out and punt every drive in the first half. But you don't have the turnovers. You protect the ball for the most part. And the Ravens, again, don't hit you up through the air. They don't go after, James Pierre. They ran the QB read option. And that's where your strength is supposed to be for this team. I'll say Cam Hayward, I think, played well as he could. I think that he fought to the bitter end, but Alex Highsmith biting inside a lot. He made a big sack in the game, but there were too many other plays where I thought he was lost and out of position. TJ Watt basically silenced in this game. I don't think he finished the game with a tackle. He had a few pressures, but they clearly had a plan to neutralize him, and they did. Just the run defense not being there. Patrick Queen late to the spot, late to the hole. On multiple occasions, just bad performances all around. And this was where the Steelers were supposed to be better in this situation. They say, okay, the Ravens in the last game, they hurt you with the read option, and that opened up so many other confusing points in your defense where you had more miscommunications because too many people were trying to do different things against the read option. This was your chance to show that you learned from it, and you didn't. And that goes back to Tomlin. That goes back to Austin. That goes back to this team's game plan for facing this Ravens team. And again, that's not to discredit the Ravens. They're a heck of a team. I picked them to go to the Super Bowl this year in my preseason picks and in my playoff bracket that I did. But that still does not excuse coming out as flat as the Steelers did in this game. And again, it goes back to Mike Tomlin, and then it does bring up the other playoff losses. Now, again, I think this one's different, but the bottom line was the Steelers, they've won so many games over the past however many years because they have found at least one or two objective advantages in schematics, in talent, in some way to say, hey, if we do this thing here, we can overpower this other team's strength. We can neutralize this team's strength, make this a game on our terms. And there's so many times that has worked. But in the playoffs, you're now talking about 6 straight times that it hasn't worked, 5 straight years where it hasn't worked in the first round of the playoffs. And that is the disappointing part of this. And I'll get into what the Steelers need to do with Mike Tomlin, or if they want to make changes in a bit. But to me, this game right here goes right to the heart of not being able to defend the read option, offense not clicking and looking beat. Now, I will say the Steelers fighting back in the second half was at least something, but it doesn't overshadow the fact that they got mollywopped in this game. They were outplayed, out-schemed, and they looked like they didn't even belong. And frankly, they didn't. If the way they ended the season, you end the season losing 5 straight games after starting 10-3, you collapse. And yes, we could say, hey, tough schedule, tough this, things didn't go here, there, anywhere. You still need to at least put up a fight. If the Steelers lose this game 28-27 because the Ravens came, had a last-second comeback, I think that even though it's still a playoff loss, it's different. This right here, this brings up major questions for how do you move forward? How do you even go back and you say, is this plan worth chopping it up again with? And that's a legitimate question, I think, for the first time in a while. And I know there's other people that have been saying, "Oh, I've been saying for years the Steelers are done. They'll never have a winning season. They'll finish last place next year. They're gonna fall off," and they don't do that. But you have to ask yourself, what do you have to get better at to make it so that this team, the way that it's built now, and if you add other pieces to it, and they're going to need to add several other pieces to it, how can this team be a team that competes better with the Ravens? Because again, they beat them earlier in the season. They've beaten them 8 out of the last 11 times. But in this key moment, you had several points to hit, and you missed all of them. And I want to talk about how they have to be able to do that moving forward, and the big questions that everyone's going to have about the Steelers' tenure moving forward, especially with Mike Tomlin. We'll get to that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll be right back with more on the Steelers. But first, remind you, this show is brought to you by TurboTax. TurboTax is where you go to avoid endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes, because that's now a thing of the past. Taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful, because TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with TurboTax expert who you can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Not taxes into the sunset. Whether you've got 1 or 20, TurboTax experts gives your taxes their undivided attention. And while you're getting real-time updates on their progress, you can focus on what really matters in your life. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for the stress-free taxes and most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can get focused on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at turbotax.com/guarantees. We're also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. If you love watching the game, you're going to love Prize Picks, because it's the easiest, most exciting way to make the daily fantasy, whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports. Prize Picks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. With the Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, if we're a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can win your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, Prize Picks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. And when your picks hit, Prize Picks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show about the Steelers season ending with a 28-14 loss to the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs. The Steelers played this game And again, we'll talk about the offense because I hammered on the defense a lot, and we will get back to the defense. I thought at least the plan initially came out and made sense, throwing the ball, the throw to Pat Freiermuth that he dropped. And I thought that there were several chances the offense had in itself, but ultimately you fall flat and miss several opportunities. Freiermuth dropping that first down. I thought there were some plays Russell Wilson missed. I honestly didn't put too much of the first half on Russell Wilson. Some of it was pressure. Some of it was drop passes. Some of it was Pat Freiermuth getting the ball in space one-on-one with a cornerback to beat, and he loses. And that's not what you need to have from your big paid playmaker on offense. Now, you go to the second half, Russell Wilson. That's the crazy part. You look at Russell Wilson's stat line: 20 of 29 for 270 and 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. It looks awesome, looks great. But my thing is this: I think that the Steelers' offense, they deserve credit because people can say, "Oh, they played in prevent." Well, they played prevent again and got beat deep. I don't think that was the answer. I think Russell Wilson made some really great throws down the stretch. But my thing is, it just hasn't been enough. And this is now what? 5 straight games in this whole entire losing streak. They've never scored 20 points at any point. And that's where, as much as Russell Wilson, I think, has said a lot of the right things, I think there's times he's made some great plays this year, but he just bears those responsibilities just as much as Mike Tomlin does for the lack of execution, the lack of game plan, and what the Steelers haven't been able to get done. And when I look at Russell Wilson and the things he did, again, I think that some of those throws he made in this game were on the money. In fact, I think if I'm grading him, I'm actually might be giving him a star because some of the throws that he did were the best things that the Steelers had. George Pickens getting involved, Van Jefferson actually catching a 30-yard touchdown. Never thought that was on my bingo card. Calvin Austin with a tough catch, Mike Williams with a tough catch. But ultimately, the Steelers needed to have something going early in this game to set the tone that at least could have bought the Steelers defense some time in this game. 4 straight punts is never going to get you the results that you wanted. But again, that doesn't alleviate the defense. And that's something that I think I had a few back and forths with fans during towards the end of the game when I was saying the defense needed to be better in this game. And they were like, well, the defense was gassed because the offense didn't put up points, didn't sustain drives, kept putting them out there. And listen, that has been the case, and I think several other times, not just this year, but in previous seasons. You go back to that Chiefs loss in the playoffs. That's exactly what the case was. The defense came out and balled out to start the game. They forced multiple turnovers and even scored themselves. If the offense gives them anything in that game, it might be a contest. But in this game, your opening drive, you give up a 95-yard touchdown drive after the offense pins them back at the 5. You did force a punt in your second drive, but then you give them an 85-yard drive. I think that was completely from running the ball, which that's what makes that really embarrassing on 13 plays. Then you give a 90-yard touchdown drive after that. That's 3 straight drives of 85 yards, or not 3 straight, excuse me, because there was one in between, but that's 3 straight drives of 85 yards, or 3 drives period in the first half of 85 yards or more that go for touchdowns. That's inexcusable. You have to find answers. And I know that this is Lamar Jackson, and I think, again, that's the MVP. Derrick Henry's a bad man, but this was a defense that was supposed to be able to stand up to that challenge. And again, they have stood up to this challenge before, but they didn't do it enough. And I think that's where this team did fall short. But so I'm not putting the first half defensive problems on the offense, but I am putting the fact that they didn't find answers enough in this game on the game plan and on the team's plan. And we could talk about, we'll have plenty of time to talk about what this team needs to focus on personnel wise to improve. I think that certainly you could look at the trenches and wonder, why didn't that ever develop? Questions about Pat Meyer. You can look at, I think, Dan Moore Jr. never played well. He ended up leaving this game. What's crazy is Spencer Anderson, I think, actually, it's one of the classic sayings that you say is when an offensive lineman isn't being talked about, that means they're doing their job. I forgot Spencer Anderson subbed into the game at one point because I wasn't thinking about the left tackle spot being a turnstile. And I was like, that's actually a good thing. Now, Spencer Anderson eventually did get beat, and I thought that he's a backup. That's not what he was brought to the team to do. He's brought to be that serviceable backup, not your starting left tackle. But the offensive line throughout the rest of the season did not develop. And this was supposed to be a team that was built for, how they were going to get through December football and January football. They were going to run the football. They were going to pound you. They were going to move you off the line of scrimmage. And they weren't that. Now, I think some guys were. Like, for example, I think Zach Frazier had a heck of a season. I think Mason McCormick was very up and down, but I think that in the run game he was solid. I even think Broderick Jones had some really good plays throughout the bad stretch, and I even think he had a couple good games down the stretch for the Steelers. But Dan Moore Jr. being as much of a negative contributor to the team played a big role in it. Isaac Seumalo, I think, was one of the most underperforming players on the team when you look at what was expected of them and what they didn't deliver. And when you have in the veterans on your line that was supposed to uphold, their jobs, letting you down, then you put it all on the young guys. That's going to be a lot for that group to come together on, and that's going to be pointing major questions as far as how do they address the offensive line moving forward. Sure, Troy Fautano will be coming back. Jones, Frazier, McCormick can all grow from this. And I think there's potential there, but you need to see that potential start to manifest very, very soon. And again, you don't know what your plan is on offense right now, because as I said, even before this game, and I think I started to say this after the Chiefs game, I'm like, man, like Russell Wilson has to step up at some point. Otherwise, there's not much of a reason to keep him unless he's getting a really team-friendly deal. And it got more team-friendly with every loss, in my opinion, with what they would need to offer him if they wanted to keep him around. Because of course this year they're paying in the league minimum because of his Broncos deal. Now that's up. I know there were rumors about 3 years, $30 million each year. I've been saying, even when that was going on, even when the Steelers were having 28.4 points per game, I was saying, hey, that needs to be more like 20 to 25 at best, because as much as it would be nice to keep Russell Wilson, if the version of Russell Wilson that was leading the Steelers to score 28 points a game, as much as that would have been nice, this team needed to add so many other pieces to keep moving in the right direction. And I don't think just signing Russell Wilson would make them that. Now, after these past 5 games, you can't even look at that. And honestly, like, you need a super team-friendly deal that would be like around like $10 million, I think, if you wanted to keep Russell Wilson around. And I don't know how much he would go for on the market right now, considering how his hand in the Steelers' bad end of the season. But I think it shows that you still have a lot of questions that you have on offense, and that's the disappointing part was you thought you might have found the answers, especially mid-season, not even mid-season, through the third quarter of the season. You thought, hey, this offense is humming, it's working, you got the pass game going, and then all of that seems to just dissipate at the end of the season. And again, I think there's some people out there going to say, oh, well, that's happened every year for the past several years. That's not necessarily the case, because last year they found answers. They won 3 straight to close out the game. The year before that, I think they won 3 out of their last 4. Year before that, they won another 3 out of 4. I think one of these years they won 4 straight. They've been able to play and win to close out the season, and then of course lost in the playoffs. But this was different in this race. And yes, again, talent and competition play a factor into that as well. I don't think any teams played as many teams with as many wins as they did in that 11 game stretch with the Eagles, Ravens, and Chiefs. But still, this was supposed to be a team that was ready for that challenge, and they weren't. And I think that's the real disappointing part of it. And again, it goes back to the looking at how you've constructed this team. Now, I don't think you could throw out everything with the team. I think you still want to keep like the young pieces that you got. I think the young offensive linemen are a good part of the future, but now you do have big questions about Mike Tomlin, about the idea of what this team is supposed to be, if it can ever be that, what players you bring back, what players you get rid of, what players that are currently slotted to come back that you get rid of anyways, because you need to move on, you need to create space and force something else. All those are major questions for Omar Khan, for Art Rooney, and I'd say Mike Tomlin, but I think Mike Tomlin's part of that equation of the questions. Now, I'll explain why I don't think Mike Tomlin's ever going to get fired right at this point. But if he was to not be back with the Steelers, it's going to take one of 2 things happening in this offseason. I'll talk about what those 2 things are next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's right, $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, with your first bet of $5 or more, only on FanDuel Sportsbook. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for your live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. And here are your NFL playoff lines for Sunday, as the Bills go into Sunday as 8.5-point favorites over the Broncos. The Eagles are 4.5-point favorites over the Packers. The Buccaneers are 3-point favorites over the Commanders, and the Vikings are 2.5-point road favorites over the Rams. Where will you put your money in the NFL playoffs? You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel today. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your best chance at $200 in bonus bets when you break your first bet of $5 or more. It is guaranteed when you get those bonus, when you place your first $5 bet for $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here, and I want to talk, again, we could talk more about this game if we wanted, but I think the big question that everyone wants to talk about is, what do you do now? And what are the biggest questions about the future? Now, let's start right at the top, and that's Mike Tomlin. And the question, I got asked this question several times during the game. Do the Steelers fire Mike Tomlin? I don't think the Steelers fire Mike Tomlin. That's not the Art Rooney way. And I know there's cause for it. And listen, I think that this is this playoff loss. This is different than the other ones. This was like, oh man, they really didn't have the fight early on in this game. They brought some fight late, but that wasn't nearly enough, and that's not what you need for your team, and especially when I thought this is against an opponent that this is not like you're playing the Bills, it's not like you're playing the Chiefs. This was something that you're supposed to come out with a game plan to limit them, get the Black Air Forces game that Mike Tomlin pulls off in the regular season a lot, and you didn't have it in this game. So then you have the question, what do you handle things? Now, Art Rooney and the Rooneys, they're not a group that's going to fire a coach just the year after giving them a 3-year extension. So there's two things that could happen if the Steelers were to be without Mike Tomlin next year. And one of them is trading him, which people have talked about. Maybe that's an option. I don't know. I've looked at trades in the past for coaches. I don't know what people would give up for him. We can all speculate and say a first and a second, 2 firsts, 2 seconds. I'm not going to pretend like I know how that works, because that's such a rarity in the NFL. And, I think there's different coaches every time, and what teams get back for that. I think that's neither here nor there, but I do think it should be on the table, at least being considered by the Steelers, if they feel that Mike Tomlin isn't part of the future. Now, the other way this could happen is if Mike Tomlin either retires or steps down, kind of like Sean Payton did in New Orleans, and saying, you know what, I'm going to take a year off from football. This team can move on. I'll find a new home in a year's time. Granted, he might not even have to take a year off. He could just, go right to that. But do any of those happen? I'm not so sure. I think that if this happens, it would have to be Mike Tomlin's call. I think the Steelers would, believe that, hey, you sign this guy for a reason. You like him as the leader of your organization. He gets you to the playoffs 4 out of the last 5 seasons, 8 out of the last 11. But clearly, this team hasn't been able to deliver in the playoffs, and clearly, this loss, and it's the end of this season. I think this was the most time, the biggest time in that stretch that we're talking about with all the playoff losses since their last playoff win. I think this was the most defeated this team looked in a game where it was like, hey, they should have been in this one. Again, like the Chiefs game, when they were in that game, it was like, how are they doing this right now? Because the old man Ben Roethlisberger team, that wasn't supposed to be even hanging with the Chiefs. So when the Chiefs went up in that one, it was kind of like, all right, that is what it is. Last year, it was like, man, everyone was talking about they need this blizzard. They need the blizzard to win this game. That was a big talk of that game, because they knew the Bills outmatched the Steelers personnel-wise. That one wasn't as much. This one, I think you could say, hey, look, the Ravens have the talent to beat you. They won the division. You've been struggling, but you were supposed to come out with a better look here, and that's where I think the Steelers have to look at things with Mike Tomlin. And Mike Tomlin has to ask himself, hey, do I feel like I'm bringing my best every day? And if Mike Tomlin feels like that's the case, then he's gonna make his decision based off of that. I think that probably means I think he probably looks at himself and says, I can do better, I can do more, and I will do more, and he'll stick around. But that's why I don't think it's likely, because the Rooneys are going to put it in his hands or his decision, and if he wants to come back, they're going to keep riding with him. So then the question is, well, what can they change off of that? Well, I don't think you can necessarily change the entire philosophy of the team. And I think to some people that might be a death knell. And maybe it is, because the way they've played again in the way that this season ended, it was another disappointing loss. And you put yourself in a position where you're going to be asking a lot of the same questions. You still don't know what you have on the offensive line. You still don't know what you're going to have at quarterback. You still don't know who your best playmakers are on offense. And then your defense, which played very well for most of the season, crumbled late, and especially crumbled in the playoff games. And again, it'd be one thing if this passing attack picked at, James Pierre and Corey Trice and DeMonte KZ, but this was a rushing attack that was predicated, that put the onus on, hey, Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, hold up your edges, win your spots. Patrick Queen, who they brought here to make plays, run sideline to sideline. Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, Larry Ogunjobi, who also makes a good bit of money in this defense. Hold your gaps. Make sure that you can contain this. Make sure that that's not the thing that can beat the Steelers in this game, except it was. And so then you do have to ask yourself, is the philosophy of the Steelers never going to work? Now, I will point out that there's another team in Pennsylvania that it does kind of work for in a lot of games. Granted, we got to see how they play in this playoffs. The Eagles play very much that style of ball. They look to win in the trenches. They look to dominate you defensively. They look to run the ball on the ground with a dominant offensive line. And as I said, when the Steelers are playing the Eagles are a couple of years away from being that base, because their offensive line needs to develop. At least they're a couple of years from having the offensive line that the Eagles do to get there. I think that if Fautanu, Jones, Frazier, McCormick, that crew grows as a nucleus, and they add maybe a good free agent in there, that can be a top offensive line in the league. And if that happens, then you can go to town with whatever running back combination, and it'll make the life easier for whoever your quarterback is at that time. But I don't think this is an easy answer. I don't think it's just as simple as bringing back Russell Wilson. If you do, again, it's got to be real cheap. I don't think the easy answer is bringing back Justin Fields for sure, if that's an expensive contract. I think that Justin Fields should be given a shot to grow now that he's had a year to sit on the bench and to think about it. I think that if you can get him to agree to, a $10 million deal or something like that, bring him on back and give him a chance to earn a real chance to earn the starting role this next year and show how he's grown. But let's not pretend like that's going to solve everything either. This next year, this team needs to be, whether it's Mike Tomlin, a head coach, Terrell Austin. I think, most likely you probably see him go as a defensive coordinator. Arthur Smith, he's getting interviews from teams across the league, and I don't know how that's working right now, but you have to come back and you have to have something that you're strong at and play to your strengths. And that was something that we said going into this Ravens game. The Steelers needed to play to their strengths. They needed to throw the ball to their playmakers, let them be playmakers. They needed to blitz. They needed to press. They needed to beat the Ravens by playing their aggressive style of defense and dictate the pace of play. They never did that in this game as a defense. And again, it's not that they didn't call blitzes, because I think they did. And I'll be really intrigued to see how this game gets charted out and how many pass rush snaps Patrick Queen had, because as I said before, they were 5-1 when he rushed the quarterback 6 or more times this season. But the problem is that when they did blitz, they still didn't get Lamar Jackson down. And that's something that in all their other games against Lamar Jackson, they've been able to do. Even in the last one, they were able to get a turnover by getting to him, and they were able to keep themselves alive. They were able to do that this year. So I look at this team and I think that, man, there are still so many questions to be asked. And so if you're saying fire Mike Tomlin, again, I don't think that's going to happen. But I could see there is a lane for the Steelers to say, hey, we are going to move on. Let's see if we can get some compensation for him. And if they get some compensation, then it's about, okay, well, what direction do you want to go? Because I can tell you right now, if you're talking about, oh, well, just go get Ben Johnson, that'll fix everything. I'm not 100% sure Ben Johnson will want to come to a team that doesn't have its quarterback, that's drafting at the bottom of the first round. It's going to have to take time to get its quarterback and still doesn't have answers on offense. I'm pretty sure he'll want to go somewhere that has the young quarterback that he thinks he can mold, that has the young offensive talent that to make things happen. Now, the Steelers do have plenty of salary cap space to be able to make moves this offseason. They do have the space to go and make changes, but I think that's the thing, is they have to ask themselves, what's the biggest change that you can make to be better next season? Could it be winning in the trenches more consistently? Because that didn't happen enough for the Steelers offense, especially down the stretch, and that took away the identity they were hoping to form, that it never did. And that was supposed to be the offense that Russell Wilson had. again, it never manifested. So it kind of went. It made play action passing less effective when you can't run the ball, when you can't bully people with your offensive line, and that puts you behind the 8 ball. But I think that when you look at that and how the defense didn't play well, that's why you're now at several major crossroads, and that's where I think there's so much for the Steelers management to figure out, from Art Rooney to Omar Khan to Andy Weidel, and including Mike Tomlin, what they want to do. Now, I'm sure I think we'll get an answer on what will happen with Mike Tomlin probably sometime this week. I would imagine they'll take times to lick their wounds, figure some things out, and talk about things. And if Mike Tomlin's not feeling like he's up for sticking with the Steelers, and they're open to making a move, and they're saying, hey, mutual parting of ways, we're going to trade him somewhere, I feel like that's going to get announced rather quick, because all teams that have fired their head coaches, they're looking right now. So they're trying to be aggressive. So if this move is going to happen, it's going to have to happen right away. And again, I think this time around, this is different than the last ones. And this is, as a person that I've said for a long time, I think Mike Tomlin gets blamed for a lot of stuff that isn't his fault. I think there's plenty of those other playoff losses that were about execution and were about turnover. But in this game, this team came out flat on both sides of the ball. There wasn't the big turnovers that were just happenstance. There were guys making mistakes and blowing execution and not playing the way that they should be playing. But ultimately, I still felt this game plan, they should have been prepared to stop things the Ravens did in this game that weren't particularly unique to things that the Steelers couldn't be able to do. I do think that they should have been able to do a better job on Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. Again, I don't think they would have shut them down even if they played like a really good game, but they would have limited them. They would have not allowed them to get 267 combined rushing yards on 41 attempts. That's insane. And you can't live that way when that's supposed to be your calling card. So with all that being said, the Steelers do have lots of questions heading into the offseason. And that's the disappointing part, was you at least thought, hey, if they had gone out on swinging, maybe they could say, all right, well, they grew in this way. They're different this time around. And last year you could say, hey, maybe there was something growing for you there. You got the run game going late in the season. You were able to win 3 straight to get yourself to the playoffs. But when you lose 5 straight to end the season, there are no silver linings. There are no, cloud, finding something in the clouds where you can say, hey, that's what we can work with. There's no nice moral victory to the end of this. It's just flat failure. And that's what the Steelers have to live with right now. So if the Steelers want to go back at it with Tomlin, they need to find major changes to happen with this team, from defensive coordinator, O-line, personnel-wise, how they're assembling things. But if they're not going with Tomlin, then they need to figure out what are the different things that they're going to go with here. Do they want to keep the competitive core that they have together? Because clearly this team can make the playoffs and should make the playoffs. They've done it 4 in the last 5 years. But the question is, if you want to become that team that gets further than just in the playoffs, and you want to be a team that gets to the second, third round, get to the AFC Championship game again, you have to figure out what that philosophy is. If it's re-upping and trying to say, hey, let's get our offensive line better, let's shore up the weaknesses we had on defense, fine. But it's going to take aggressive moves, and that's where it's going to come down to Art Rooney deciding what the team's direction is, Omar Khan making smart moves. I think he's made smart moves to help them build some parts of the roster. I think there's good young parts on the roster, but ultimately it's still a long way to go, what it looks like for this Steelers team. And that's the disappointing part, was you at least wanted to show this year you had made progress, but yet again, you finish with a 10-7 year, one and done in the playoffs, losing to a team with an MVP level quarterback. We'll have a lot more to discuss as the week goes on. This is your bonus episode on Sunday. I will have a Monday morning episode out for Steelers fans. We'll talk more about what we didn't see in this game and what we do need to see heading into the offseason. We'll also try to do our grades still probably by Tuesday for this one. So we still have a lot going on. But thanks again for tuning in all season long, Steelers fans. Keep your heads up. I know that this is a rough one, but I do think that there's still a lot of questions that will be answered. And hey, this is part of what you get with being a fan. You have the tough days, you have the tough times. This is what you stick through for, to see when they do make their rise, whether it's with Mike Tomlin, whether it's next year, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, more years than that you stuck through those tough times and you saw them through that. So hang in there, Steelers fans. We will be here every day, keeping the conversation going here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again to everyone who chimed in, who tuned in. We appreciate all of you and all of our guests all season long. And again, we're not stopping. We're still going 24/7, 365, 5 days a week. We are bringing you episodes Monday through Friday with our bonus content. We'll also have our updates if there's any big moves by the Steelers. We'll talk about all that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, right here on your favorite podcasting apps on YouTube. We'll see you Monday morning here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.